Hello BookTube. I have another recommendation from Elizabeth at Books and Pieces for you. Today's book is 7 Brief Lessons on Physics. Physics was my first scientific love. I had a cousin when I was very small who was in college studying physics, and he used to come visit my family, and we would do little scientific experiments together, just, the Newtonian properties of fluids and kinetic energy, and it was just one of my favorite memories of my childhood. And this book also ties back into my previous video that scientists are in fact creative. I want to read one of the quotes from this book before we get started, just so you know a little more about kind of the scope of this book. Science begins with a vision. Scientific thought is fed by the capacity to see things differently than they have previously been seen. And this author not only provides very accessible summaries of 7 key theories and foundational principles within physics, but he explains what it's like to be a scientist. I'm shaking my Kindle because I'm so excited. What it's like to be a scientist and what it means to answer questions and to make that knowledge accessible to others is a responsibility of a scientist. We are not an elite club. We do things partially for that, to answer questions and to gain knowledge for humankind, and that means that that knowledge should be accessible to everyone. And this book is written in a way that even if you don't have a scientific background, I highly recommend you pick it up. I would recommend the ebook version of this, which is what I read. If you haven't had any science classes, particularly college level science classes, you might come across a few words that you might not be familiar with. The author does write this in a very narrative, easy to follow way, but it allows you to look up a word without breaking that pace and breaking that sort of flow within each of the 7 chapters. And so the ebook would make this a little bit easier to sort of digest. And I would also recommend that it is a very short book, so I think it's under or right at 100 pages, that you take it a chapter at a time and really contemplate each of the chapters and the content that they provide. He's really done an excellent job in boiling down something that's extremely complex, and there's obviously an entire field of study about each of these, topics into the core principles of each of those theorems and each of those principles. And I want to share a second sort of quote. I'm so excited about this book. I'm actually going to pick up, I think, everything else he's ever written, because that's how I read. I warned you guys getting into this that I read impulsively and I'm like a squirrel. The second concept that I really want to share that the author touches on, though he doesn't name it directly, is scientific responsibility. He brings up phrases that geniuses and pioneers and revolutionary thinkers have used when communicating their ideas to other professionals, and I think the key for this is the way that it's phrased. I'm going to read this to you, and it corresponds with letters back and forth between different scientists and geniuses. Note the wonderful initial "it seems to me," which recalls the "I think" with which Darwin introduces in his notebooks the great idea that species evolve, or the hesitation spoken by Faraday when introducing for the first time the revolutionary idea of magnetic fields. Genius hesitates. I love that passage. This one passage really sums up scientific responsibility. Do not make bigger claims than your data supports. When you have something that's revolutionary, you don't, eureka, that I've never heard that ever. You don't eureka moment. What you do is, oh, well, that didn't work. Because if it's not what you hypothesized and you've had experience running this a lot of other times, your immediate reaction is something went wrong. And the second is you have to replicate your results. So it's not, yes, I've discovered this, oh my God, this works. It's, okay, now I have to discover, point at this one thing from every perceivable angle in order to show that this really happened. And I love the idea, the way that he phrased that, genius hesitates. This is a very accessible introduction to physics. If you have an interest in popular science, particularly physics, I would highly recommend this. And I'm going to read, like I said, everything else he's written. So I will let you know how I get along with those books, and also how I feel about the way they were written and if they're going to be accessible for most people. I can't rave enough about this book. I wish more scientists wrote in a way that was so pleasing and so accessible for everyone, because what we do should be accessible to everyone. No one should think that there's this elusive scientist that you can't ask questions and we're like an anomaly, because we're not. And what we do should be accessible. And I think that this author did an excellent job of that. I hope you enjoyed this somewhat sporadic and frantic video of me raving and shaking things at you. If you have any questions or other recommendations, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.